Well, thanks everybody for great turnout. Thanks to the Ad Club for having us on this panel. I'm David Horowitz. I'll be the moderator here. I'll give you just a quick background and then I'm going to have the different panelists introduce themselves. I've been in the corporate venture capital space for about 16 years. Most of it was at Comcast, where I was one of the founders and managing director of the venture fund. And about 2 years ago, I decided to go out on my own and start my own venture firm where we do corporate venture capital for other corporations and brands. And let me introduce, first start with Jessica so everybody can introduce everyone in the panel's backgrounds.
Hey guys, can you hear me okay? So my name's Jessica. I'm with KBS Ventures. So my background is I started exactly where probably most of you guys did. So I spent the first 9 years of my career at a global media agency, Zenith Media, where I was working with brands like Verizon, H&M, Gucci. Started working with startups on the side about 5 years ago and just obviously fell in love with the space in terms of the passion and the energy and just the creativity that comes when you work with founders. But I really wanted to learn what it meant to be at a startup. So I left to go to a startup myself, a startup called Evolution that specialized in connecting brands and startups for pilot programs and mentoring and partnerships. So we worked with brands like Kraft and Unilever to help pair them up with different tech solutions. Through that journey, I ultimately built out a partnership network and had relationships with different venture funds around the city who ultimately brought me into KBS. So I run our corporate venture fund. We're a global advertising agency. So we focus on all early stage B2B digital media and marketing tech companies that we really believe are transforming Madison Avenue and solving the needs of the modern CMO. So it's nice to kind of bring it all together. So thanks for having me.
Hi everyone, I'm Nisha Dua. I am indeed based in this building. I'm in the house, as it were.
Thank you for having us today.
Our pleasure. Thanks to Olivia for helping organize. So I run and helped found a firm called BBG Ventures. We are not a typical strategic or corporate VC fund, but AOL is in fact our sole LP. Our mandate is to invest in companies with at least one female founder, but we invest in consumer technology, so across marketplaces, media, mobile services, commerce, and connected living. And our thesis is really around how is consumer behavior changing in the technology landscape. And we bring back that knowledge to AOL and to Verizon. Before that, I was the chief of staff for the AOL content brand. So I worked across 20 of AOL's brands, including Cambio, which is a millennial platform for women, which I ran for 2 years. So although I am not really that familiar with the agency space in the same way that the rest of the panel is, deeply kind of embedded with the advertising and sales team here and spent a lot of time learning my way through this world when I ran Cambio. I'm a former mergers and acquisitions lawyer and recovering management consultant. So as Jessica said, all paths lead to one, and it's a bunch of different skill sets that have sort of helped me end up in this role.
That's badass, isn't it? It's smart, but then you have the accent on top of it too. So that's really badass. Um, I'll be Mike Duda, founder of Bullish, which is basically two legal entities under one brand. It's an ad agency and a consumer investment fund, early stage. So on one hand, we have people from the worlds of Deutsch, Droga5, and Goldman Sachs, as of yesterday, now Digitas and A.T. Kearney. And we have an investment fund that looks for wonderfully disruptive early stage consumer. Birchbox, Warby Parker, Harry's, Peloton. We have 16 portfolio companies that serves using agency side and marketing talent to help build the brands and great big companies. And yet we work with later stage companies early in an S curve like GNC. You probably bumped into about 50 of them on the way over here. There's 202 in Manhattan. Balance Bar, Ann Taylor, and Loft, and numerous brands. And we do stuff with private equity firms. We have a chip on our shoulder to prove that the power of brand in marketing can accelerate business success, and it's not an expense that procurement people look to like shave down.
Terrific. Well, again, great panel here to educate us on venture capital. And maybe that's the first place to start. Raise your hand if you know what venture capital is.
Beyond Shark Tank.
Does anybody in the room work for a venture capital firm? Does anybody work for a startup that has an investment from a venture capital firm? Okay.
Are the rest of you from agencies?
Okay, so I think some familiarity, but maybe with the exception of one person, still a new industry. So maybe the first question is just to educate people on what venture capital is, and maybe just because each of your different groups is probably a little different than traditional VC. Mike, you're affiliated with an agency. Nisha, you have AOL as your backer, and Jessica, you're with KBSP, which is an agency. So just talk about how your investment activities are also different than other pure financial investors.
Well, I actually think, given the composition of this audience, it's quite nice to go back to basics, which is venture capital is about looking for companies that probably have a high risk profile but have the potential for high growth. And so that is intrinsically connected with this idea that every VC out there is looking for which companies are inventing the future and, highly focused on innovation. And it's a very interesting time in the market because every man and their dog has a fund.
Or a startup.
Yeah, or a startup, exactly. And so it's this fascinating paradigm we're in, which is there's a flood of money into the market. So I think in Q1 of this year, venture funds raised the most money from LPs since a long time. I don't know what the comparable is back to maybe at least versus Q1 of last year. And so when you think of all this money flooding into the market and the number of corporate VCs that are popping up as well, everyone is trying to have a stake in innovation and to find the next Instagram or Mixpanel or whatever it is. But the critical thing here is, and we see this a lot, is trying to find the difference between the investment that's a really great business that may in fact end up being profitable over the long term and that an owner should just quite frankly own and sit on versus the business that is truly high growth and needs capital at the beginning to ultimately deliver a 10x return for the investment that the VC puts into it.
So just to build on that a little bit, so VCs are always looking for the trends that are 3 to 5 years out. So a lot of the things that we see at the seed stage, a lot of times they're going to be pre-product or they're going to be pre-revenue. So us as a corporate VC, we're looking to really educate our clients to keep them ahead of the curve and be aligning with some of these entrepreneurs that are really going to be shaping their business in the next 18 months. To peel back venture capital a little bit more, typically there's institutional VCs. So those are, if you guys heard of like Andreessen Horowitz or Sequoia or Layer Ventures, so those are institutional VCs. So they raise capital from what's called LPs, limited partners. So they have to fundraise themselves. So when you hear Andreessen Horowitz have a $1.5 billion fund, that's coming from people like high net worth individuals, pension funds, fund of funds, endowments, a lot of different places for them to deploy capital from. So then they deploy capital for typically 3 to 5 years. Then that's their commitment period. Then they'll have a separate period that's follow on. So that's one sector of VC. The sector of VC that a lot of us are focused on is corporate VC. And there's a lot of trends going on in terms of the number of new entrants in the market of corporate VCs. That comes from when corporations, brands, have venture arms that are also making these investments. And about 76% of those are investing off the balance sheet. So a lot of times they're not necessarily doing it for financial returns. Some of them are, absolutely, but a lot of the times they're doing it more so for that strategic value add. So whether that's for R&D, whether that's for potential exits that they want to get in early, whether they want to better understand different technologies, those are some of the reasons that corporate VCs are popping up, and that I think is really important for everybody in this room to be aware of. So us as a corporate VC of a global advertising agency, we want to be investing in those companies that's going to help our clients future-proof their business, that's going to help our clients understand how the market is moving. So we like to say we're in the job preservation for the CMO, because let's be honest, it's a really hard job. So we like to say that we're making our clients smarter and more ahead of the game by making these investments, which ultimately positions us more effectively as an agency.
Great. So there's so many companies out there to invest in. I think probably all of us who read, and we'll get to that later about how to get even more educated on this. But how do you guys determine, a good investment from a bad investment, especially when you're looking at really early stage companies? They don't have any revenue. They may have very little customers. What distinguishes a good investment or a good opportunity versus one that you would dismiss maybe after looking at their business plan or presentation?
We have a list of criteria. We have diligence. We market size. We look at different things. It's the jockey. At the stage we're at, it's seed and Series A. We can go into like various levels when people invest in that. But as he said, you want to show some level of proof of concept. So if someone comes to us with an idea, and us in the agency business, like ideas mean everything. Well, who monetizes that? Still waiting for that answer. No one does. It's a point of entry to pitch, and then you get paid to do the time it takes to do 10 radio ads and stuff. So it's like it shows some level of proof of concept that you have something. But it's like usually you fall in love with the team that they're going to figure it out. And I go back, I've learned more when we started in 2010 from our companies than we've given. Birchbox came to us, and Birchbox had problems raising money for numerous reasons. They didn't have the best pitch deck in the world. To be blunt, gender does play a role. It is tougher for women to raise venture capital, and these two could speak to it much more powerfully than I could. But it's like you could tell the idea. But our team, I worked on Revlon for 2 years. And so I got that samples, like Estee Lauder commits 10% of their marketing budget and expenses towards samples that they give to Macy's, but they have no idea what the data is after that. This team actually got that stuff for free. It took $3.25 to ship it, but they charged $10 for it, got analytics they could sell back to the company. That's kind of genius. And yet a lot of VCs that might be in Palo Alto or whatever says, well, my wife would get bored of this after 4 months. It's like, well, the target audience doesn't have a 7-car garage in Palo Alto. Just because you have 2 X chromosomes doesn't mean the reason to do it. And I'm telling you like a somewhat inappropriate story to kind of prove out a point. It's just like our thesis is you bet on the people. They showed proof of concept. And it was literally 3 people that had done a WordPress test. But I knew they wouldn't fail. And you just expect something along the way to go wrong and not right. But you're betting on people that you don't mind taking a call from at midnight or something like that. Some things fail. Some things like Fab skyrocket up and get drunk with way too much money, and then they come crashing down because money fuels like inappropriate growth. But it's for us, I could speak smartly about thesis. We invest in this. It's about people and the belief. And tangentially, it's probably North American based and B2C. But that's us, and everyone has a different thesis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I second that, especially at the early stage. It's all about the people. So you really want to get to know the founder, how they see the world, what secrets have they uncovered, what's broken, why is it broken, why do they want to obsessively fix that problem? So you almost have this like internal checklist that you're going on in your head. Because keep in mind, venture is a very human business. So, and that's actually personally one of the things that I love most about it, especially being on the agency side. You're getting a new client every like 6-7 months. Like, let's be honest about it. But with venture, you know you're going to be working with that founder for 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. It can last longer than a marriage. So you want to know that this is somebody like Mike said that you want to work with, you want to help them build their business, you're passionate about helping them solve their problem. So you kind of go through this internal checklist of like, one, do I like you? Which like kind of sounds weird, but it's like, do I want to work with you? And then 2, it's, do I believe that this is a problem? Do I believe this is a problem? Do I believe this is a pain point that people would pay for? Do I believe there's a market opportunity? So you want to look at the market a lot, the market size, how big is the market, who would pay for it, and then it becomes, do I like your solution? Which you never really fall in love. At least like I speak for us, like we never really fall in love with the product as it is at the seed stage because you know it's going to change and iterate a million times. But you want to know that the founder can be really nimble and really coachable and really open-minded to be able to iterate and figure out like what is going to be that product market fit there. And then it becomes, can this scale and can you execute? So it's really digging into the founder of, is this somebody that has past domain expertise? Have they spent time with the customer? Do they know their customer? What superpowers does this person have that's going to make them successful? Because like you said, ideas are worthless. Execution is everything. So why is that founding team going to be the one that's going to make this business a hit?
Yeah, I mean, there's not really a lot to add to that, except to say that if you Google what do VCs look for in a seed stage company, the first thing that comes to the top of the list is team and founder. And I think just to echo what these guys have said, and I think consumers are a little bit different. You can fall in love with the product when you first see it, knowing that it will change a lot. But this idea of obsession, so I would say the best founders in our portfolio are so obsessed with the product or the the problem that they're solving. And I think there are two defining characteristics of a lot of the people we see that are really successful. And one is this idea that they don't come in with just a product, but they come in with a huge vision. And you can kind of see where they're going, and they may grow into that vision. That vision may adjust. We're in a company called Ringly, and when I first heard about Ringly, I was like, who the hell wants a ring that buzzes when your phone call? Like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And then I met I met Christina. She knows that, but I met Christina, and she sat us down and she talked us through the vision for the product, which is and the line, which is really for women, your jewelry should be beautiful and your technology should be discreet. And how do we think about that across every facet of your life, from your phone ringing to your Uber arriving to needing to get to your subway to needing to get into your house? And then suddenly you start to see a much broader company that's actually a venture backable company rather than just a product. And then I think the second thing is this idea that a lot of obsessive founders who will be able to grow into that vision or be iterative or nimble have thought about a lot of the questions you ask them. So they're thinking 5 steps ahead all of the time, and they may not have all the answers, but that map is laid out for them. And even if they don't have the answer, they're sort of halfway there to thinking about it, or they have a good reason for why they haven't touched it yet.
I think also, to Mike's point, because we come from the advertising side and we invest in advertising and marketing tech, sometimes you can be a little schizophrenic in the meetings where I'll have my investor cap on it, be like analyzing and zeroing on the psyche of this founder or this person or this market, whatever it might be. But then you'll kind of flip over to the customer side and be like, can I sell this in? Do they understand the workflow? Do they have any idea on pricing or how to do it? Sometimes you meet with founders, they're sitting at a gold mine and they have no idea how to explain it. And so when you find those people and you can help mold them and shape them, it really becomes a nice additional evaluation layer that you can have, and you have a really diverse background outside of just finance.
Great, great thoughts there. So, as we talked in the beginning, each of you is sort of part of this larger organization, whether it's AOL or whether it's the different agencies that you're affiliated with, different partners, Mike, that you partnered with. Just talk about how you leverage those assets in both really your job of finding investments as well as analyzing those investments, and how you might interact with other people in the organization as part of that process.
We're such a polite panel.
I know it's so. I want you to talk more.
You're the only one thinking that. Come on.
So I think from an AOL perspective, we don't think of ourselves as a traditional corporate VC in that we don't just do media, and by the way, we don't do ad tech, but we think about consumer behavior. And so the way in which we work with AOL is we leverage AOL internal experts to help us assess companies where we maybe don't have the expertise. I think that's a pretty common, valuable piece of corporate VC. The second thing for us is, and we're building this out kind of right now, I owe Marta's team an email. Marta runs sales over here. But the question for us is, as a corporate VC, how can you be valuable? And we provide value in a bunch of different ways, but one of those is the AOL Verizon ecosystem. So for us, it's about thinking through, and we've been talking about this with Marta, what's the plug and play model that we can offer in the same way that a Bullish might offer, or Jessica's firm might offer, to provide, at least in this case, audience distribution, strategic partnerships with our media assets, or kind of like a plug-in model to our sales team. And that's great for AOL, but it's really great for our companies who are early stage and need to work through scale early on at the beginning.
Yeah, and it's interesting, and Dave, you should answer as well, because Comcast to Touchdown, but we don't have scale. But the great thing is, I was in the agency business purely for a number of years. In the agency business, to do well, you're taught, like, for you to win, everyone else must fail in a new business pitch. Or even if you're sharing a client, you want to steal a share and get share of wallet. In the VC world, for pretty much the most part, everyone comes around the table to help that entrepreneur win, because when we all make more money.
Yep.
So it's not completely altruistic, but is massively refreshing in terms of like deal flow going back and forth. That doesn't happen in the agency world unless it's forced in a good way, mostly amongst the holding company stuff. So what we come, because we're small, we have 10 to $15 million. I mean, that's piddly. That's like lunch money here at AOL and that stuff. But it's like, it's not our money that people look for. It's like bigger firms, like whether it's TPG, First Round Capital, a number of other firms will bring us in to help round out the cap tables because we bring branded marketing expertise. And so more and more, it's like you're seeing VCs. Like this week alone, 7-Eleven launched a VC arm. Sesame Street in Q1 launched a VC arm. General Mills has one. And part of that is, I really believe on the corporate side, we've had two cataclysmic financial events over the past 15 years, 2000 and 2008, where just massive amounts of business went down the drain. Coca-Cola had to fire a lot of people. A lot of these businesses had to fire a lot of people, and they came out of innovation and future profits, right? So they couldn't come up with the next vitamin water, but Coke had $4.1 billion to buy vitamin water. And that's what's going on now. And if you look at it, if you're Hershey's, if you're Campbell's Soup, who just invested in Juicero, which Google that if you want to have some fun, it's like all these CPG companies, they can't do the next shiny new toy of like an Annie's Organic. But General Mills forked over $800 million to buy Annie's Organic. So that's why like the rules of like innovation mentioned, like innovation's happening outside the womb. And so if you're AOL, how smart is it to do something like what's been institutionalized long before 7-Eleven and Big Bird came along on that side? And if you're KBS, you're doing this where like the multiple on the investment may not be the ultimate thing, but it's also the value add to the current clients, which is the revenue. And yeah, you want to make money along the way. So there's no one right way, but it's just that's the way we are like the anti-scale, but you have to bring something on the table besides money these days.
And we really believe that our venture arm drives our professional services business because it differentiates us as an agency when we're on the street talking about new business pitches. So the way that we integrate our agency network is, number one, for our diligence, we're always incorporating our business units in terms of the viability of the product, would they use this, how does this get built into their workflow. But then post-investment, we actually have a whole onboarding process that we take our portfolio founders through, where it just peels all the layers back of our organization and our network, because we want them to really squeeze the most value out of us. So that can drill down to, these are our clients, these are our strategic partners, these are different domain experts, this is how you can leverage us. So we kind of look at KBS, and I should say the larger MDC organization, as like an 800-person focus group for startups. So if it's anything, like we had one startup that wanted to learn more about video. How is it bought? How is it sold? How is it priced? So we can pull in these different domain experts from around our network and just have a really no bullshit, we could have like a really non-judgmental conversation without them feeling like they're blowing their chance to pitch BMW or whatever that might be. So having that opportunity to tap into all these different skill sets is hugely valuable to their startups. Our main value add is commercial relationships, so being able to connect them with different customers. So whether that's on a media plan, whether that's on an innovation day, whether that's speaking at our conferences, we're constantly able to give them exposure, thought leadership, and customer introductions.
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest advantage that you have having been in this industry is when you're looking at these companies, it's really hard sometimes, especially at that early stage, to pick the winner between A, B, and C. But having another group, you're all part of large organizations to help you with that, I think gives you a competitive advantage. That's what I saw in my career. So shifting topics here for a second. Jessica, at the beginning, you mentioned, you're really looking 3 to 5 years out, what the trends are in the industry, not today, but where the puck is going. So educate everybody here about where the puck is going in the media advertising space and how that is sort of impacting your investment strategy.
Yeah, so right now it's all about the bots. I didn't even mean for that to sound like a pun.
Does everybody know what that means? Raise your hand if
Messaging.
you know bot. Good.
Messaging and bots. So an area that we're spending a lot of time in right now is conversational commerce and the impact that messaging has on brands. So we made an investment recently in a company called Message.ai, and that's human-assisted AI to help brands manage one-to-one messaging at scale. So this is something when we started digging into it last summer, Facebook Messenger had just recently released Messenger IDs for brands. Well, when I ping Delta, I don't want a response 43 minutes later. I want a response immediately. So that type of nuance is something that we recognize there's a big gap in the market. So this particular solution is an enterprise solution that enables you to have millions of conversations at scale across different languages all at the same time. So that's something that we believe there's a big gap. You're going to see a lot of different AI solutions, both horizontal AI and vertical AI, that are going to be adding different solutions. Facebook wants Messenger to be the new browser. Like that's kind of the reality of where we believe things are going to really replicate what WeChat is doing in China. So we're spending a lot of time in that space. So not only from an analytics and measurement standpoint, but how native plays into the whole thing, how messaging plays into the whole thing. Another area we're starting to spend a lot more time on is around brand safety. So brand safety and security is something that's really interesting. But I would say that and personalization at scale, and new communication infrastructure is really interesting for us. So not only what are new ways to interact with your customers through different content or different channels, but what are new ways to communicate with your customer in a really effective way. What are you looking at? What are you
I mean, it doesn't really relate to advertising, I guess, but I think it's just interesting to hear about the overlap, right? Because when we think about commerce as well, we're also thinking about conversational commerce, and bots keep coming up. If you're really interested in VC, you should follow the tweets of a partner at General Catalyst called Nico Bonsadas, and he basically exclusively tweets about bots right now. But I think what's interesting for us is when I mentioned our 5 categories earlier on, and one of those is media content. And when we first started this, I think I've looked at every single Vice for Women blog that's out there, and what we sort of say to media companies when they come in, consumer media companies, is actually this is the smallest bucket in which we play. If anything, being part of AOL has made us really reticent to invest in traditional media plays because we see the way in which the landscape is changing. So when we're looking at media, we're looking for companies that are approaching content consumption in a completely different way. And there are things that people come in with that sound really interesting. So last year, everyone came in and said, "We really get millennials." No shit, Sherlock. That is like table stakes right now, and the same is true for many things around native advertising as well. Those and it's actually kind of really relevant for you guys, which is if you're still talking about those things, you're behind the 8 ball. You are completely behind. And it's really hard for you guys because what we see at AOL and when I was running Cambio, I see this. You go in, you talk to a media buyer, and they're thinking about this old paradigm. So it's hard to bridge the gap between innovation and this paradigm that currently exists and that people are still buying against. But for us, without going into too much detail there, for us, we're looking at really interesting mobile video plays. We're looking at VR. AR is, the hot topic of the moment. No one knows where it's going to go. But for us, it's about staying away from media assets that are driven by the traditional advertising model.
I think no. Go for it. Go. I was just gonna say one thing, especially for agencies that we see as a huge trend, is a lot of the innovations. They're enterprise software companies or they're SaaS companies, which doesn't really fit into that neat box of a media plan. So that's something that we're seeing as, to be honest, it could be a struggle for agencies of, they don't know how to handle some of these new solutions, whether it's predictive analytics or whether it's these new messaging channels where it's not intended to be a 12-week campaign, right? Like these are annualized contracts that brands need to figure out, and more startups are ultimately going to brands directly and circumventing the agencies is kind of the reality. Actually, please don't tweet that. I never said that. But it's kind of the reality, and I think that that's a pain point that agencies need to adapt to is how do you incorporate and how do you weave in some of these solutions that are really forward-thinking and cutting edge, but don't necessarily fit into your fall fashion campaign box.
Yeah, and I can't predict 3 to 5 hours from now, let alone 3 to 5 years. So we look at things different. We love paying consumers. So we look at very macro things, what the impact of that. Like right now, you hear a lot of VC, there's 80 million millennials out there and all like experiences. It's just like, well, millennials are people too. When Casper Mattress approaches 213, they were like, we're going to be the mattress for millennials and we're going to do this. And when you looked at it, it's like, no, you have a bigger value proposition because just because a millennial is 25 and does this doesn't mean they share the same kind of like hate going into a Sleepy's with 120 mattresses and going like this in front of a strange guy. Going, yeah, all right. That there was something timeless. So he's like, get rid of the millennials. You have something bigger than that. And so, and for all the talk with millennials, which are influencing everyone else, everyone's sleeping on the 50 plus. It's amazing. If you look at the 50 plus, it's an area that's like divorce rates are high, internet and mobile adoption are really high, medical devices are having like people are playing tennis at 70 more than ever. The drugs, Viagra's, et cetera, is up like there's active stuff. Match.com adoption is highest there and 18 to 24-year-olds. So, and if you look at who's servicing that market, AARP is a bit fuddy-duddy. Someone should be disrupting that. And so as much as we see stuff in like Mike or Attention, which has got a lot of money, it's like someone's going to go after AARP and someone's going to do it well because it's just the old adage of like once you leave the 18 to 49 set, you're done. The brand loyalty is not there anymore because there's all these new things. But for specific more to the people in the audience around like ad tech, which we don't do, it's like if you look, there's some good mentions. Look at what Alex Bogusky is doing. We're doing some work with him. He's doing some interesting stuff, and he's not afraid to talk about it because of what he is. He just rebranded a company last week. Visible is now brand something. I just talked to him yesterday. It shows you how much I like consumer. I forgot the name of that company already. MediaLink, who's in the audience, 140 people. They do smart stuff. They don't always announce everything, but they do a lot of smart stuff that connects different worlds. And I'm really impressed on paper by you and Mr. Jones. So it's the former CEO of Havas, David Jones, and he's raised $350 million. It's not a fund. It's basically an operating system. And they've made 5 investments. They're about to announce another one next week. We had along with them yesterday. It's like they have big money to change the game in a different way. And they don't hate agencies. They see a lot of opportunity where brand tech can, when we look at programmatic and that discussion with media, brand tech can take a whole nother level. So it's just like there's some interesting, even like disruptive players that weren't around 4 years ago or 5 years ago. MediaLink has been around maybe 6 or 7 years. But it's just like that's the fun of this stuff. You don't need scale in the traditional way that you used to have. Nothing against a Sequoia or a Kleiner Perkins, but it's just like what got you to success now is for no reason why those people can't get disrupted. I don't know of any category that hasn't gotten disrupted in some major degree. I just don't. And if there isn't, we're trying to look for it in consumer. So.
Great. Well, I want to make this interactive because we want to make sure that we're covering topics that we covered a lot of ground here. We talked a lot about venture capital and interesting investment areas. So maybe I'll have someone take the mic around to ask questions. We have one back there. So.
Yeah, my question is, okay, so you have $15 million worth of capital. Now you have to
loud, so-
what kind of cap rates you're looking for. It's a little difficult to manage such a portfolio with a dividing rod. So explain to us what your model is.
So our model in terms of deploying 15 million?
Yeah, I mean, the rates of return, how do you allocate capital, that type of stuff.
Well, we mostly look at seed series A, usually $100,000 to $250,000 checks, money for follow-ons. That said, we have the right to be opportunistic. I mean, our LPs are like, it's high net worth individuals. It's not institutional. So we have people in Greenwich, a syndicate in Boca, Kevin Plank, the founder of Under Armour, and so we've kind of earned the trust there. But Warby Parker opened up their B round because of stuff we did for us at American Express. And as these guys know, that looked like it's undisciplined. Why would you invest in something with over a $200 million valuation? It's Warby Parker. I think they have a long runway. We make money on it. So it's like we're looking for probably an 8x return. We're probably deploy that capital we save over 5 years because you're supposed to. It's probably going to be 3 or 4 and write bigger check sizes. And, now it's like I say seed and Series A, we're seeing convertible notes of like $200,000. Like if we show proof of concept over the next 3 months, then I'm going to do a big seed because seed's the new Series A, and I'm probably getting into the confusion camp here. But the best entrepreneurs have no problem raising capital, and they're raising bigger tranches. So, but that's a general rule of thumb, 100 to 250. But we've done 16 deals in like 5 years. That looks more micro private equity, and I'd rather be that way because we have people want us for our time and to spend time with the Brett Andersons and that stuff. Our money is the least valuable thing we bring to the table, and that's the irony and hopefully the success of what we're doing.
Question over here.
I think each of you has said independently that you don't do investments in ad tech. I was wondering, how are you defining ad tech, and what makes that space untouchable for you?
So we do invest in ad tech. So the question was, each of you said you don't invest in ad tech, and why? So it's kind of funny. So ad tech has become like a dirty word in the venture community. It's kind of funny, and I think a lot of that stems from it's becoming commoditized, it's becoming overcapitalized, it's becoming too crowded. and a lot of it is project-based work, which is not an attractive business model for VCs. So ironically, marketing tech is the new ad tech, which is kind of hilarious because it's a little bit all about semantics. But the way that we kind of quantify and define is, ad tech historically was a lot of that project-based work, and a lot of it was technologies that are helping you reach audiences at scale. So that was kind of that era that crept up of DSPs, SSPs, ad servers, that whole ball game. Now with the new marketing tech, it's really more becoming about technologies that are helping you reach the individual at scale. A little tweak to the wording there, but that's how a lot of people make that delineation. And a lot of those are more enterprise software, annualized license, more repeatable, stable, reoccurring revenue. If that helps.
My answer is not super valuable for you. My answer is that I have basically no interest in ad tech, and that's like sacrilegious to say in AOL. But good VCs spend time on what they're good at, and my partner Susan Lyon has a long 30, 40-year career in consumer and media. She ran ABC, she ran Martha Stewart, she ran Guild. I have a fraction of that expertise, but for us, we're obsessed with what content are consumers consuming. What are new forms of commerce? What is the future of work? How do we think about connecting our lives in the next 10 years? And that's what gets us going. So even though we sit within AOL, and AOL Ventures, which preceded us, did do ad tech, we actually have a brother fund at AOL called Dawn Patrol, which love to, they're out in LA, and the number of surf puns in their decks is like sort of overwhelming, riding the new wave of media. But they focus more on kind of those sorts of areas, so we let them do that.
Question, Rob?
My question is, so we talked about how you spot value, what you're looking for. What are some of the things that you are looking to insure against as it comes to like consumer behavior changing on a dime? Like what are some of like the either investments that are like kind of based on protecting the yield, if that makes any sense? Okay.
Sorry.
So I guess my question is, how can you future proof like what? It's more a trend spotting question. So when you're looking at consumer behavior and shifts in behavior, what are you trying to really zone in on and protect against? Is that more clear?
It is clearer, but I think that I don't think VC is about future proofing or protecting against. I actually think that ultimately you shouldn't be looking at too many patterns, and you shouldn't have too many checklists, and you should be looking for something that's actually completely different to what's happening now. And if you're safe and you're trying to plan for trends, then you're probably doing yourself a bit disservice, at least for the VC model, which is how do we get 1,000x return? So there's a great article in the New Yorker about Mark Andreessen, but they talk about this pretty significantly, which is to say, if you're looking for the 1,000x return and you're using a checklist for investing and you are doing pattern recognition, you're probably not going to find it, because all the black swans in the last 20 years, whether it's the PC, the iPhone, the internet, or even if you look at now things like Instagram and Snapchat, they were not predictable things. So I would look at a company like Facebook, where you say they're future proofing, but they're future proofing in that they are planning for the future. So the best way to think about trends is to look at what Facebook is doing, which is live video, at least from a consumer and media perspective. It's live video, it's chatbots with M, and that's one good way to think about what should we all be focused on.
I think, Rob, just to give another take on your question, I think a lot of these venture capital groups will build portfolios, so they may be hard to mitigate risk on a single asset or single investment, but if they could build a portfolio to diversify themselves so if one fails, because of the return profile is so high on these venture capital investments, that's kind of the way that they'll mitigate risk from a diversification perspective.
And VC is built on power laws, so you actually expect a lot of your investments to fail, and that's okay. So Fred Wilson actually just wrote a blog post recently about failing and what that means, and there's a quote in there when he was saying in the early 90s, when he had just started getting into venture. Did you guys read this blog? It's pretty good. And how he was saying back when he first started, he was almost like bragging, like, I haven't lost any money, like none of my investments have failed. And somebody said to him, like, well, then you're really not taking enough risk. And he's like, oh shit, like, yeah, you're probably right. So you want to be out there. You can have checklists. Like, of course you want to do your diligence, and of course you want to make sure like you cross as many T's as you can. But a lot of times, like, you have to think about the snowball effect on what this could create.
Yeah.
Like, I wish I could say, had I saw Uber 6 years ago, I would have been like, absolutely, like, I'm gonna be in this. But it's just thinking about the impact that that's had on a consumer behavior shift. I remember I was in a cab, coming home from JFK. It was probably like 1 in the morning. Like, cab line was a disaster. Call my Uber, get in the Uber. The Uber guy like gives me chocolate, which I was like, yes, I love when Uber guys give me chocolate. And I start like falling asleep, and I just was thinking to myself, like, I just got in a car with a stranger at 1 in the morning and took candy from him, and I am like totally confident that I'm gonna get home safely. So it's like, if you just think about that fundamental change and consumer mindset, like, that's the kind of stuff that you have to be really open-minded about as a VC, of what network effects can this type of technology create.
And that's the trap you find yourself falling into when you meet a company, which is, well, I just don't think consumers are going to do this. And the moment you say that, you should really like try and look at the company in a different way. And so Susan and I have this big post-it wall of our companies on a window in our office, and we look at them from time to time. And when you start saying, oh, that's a really nice business about some of the companies, you haven't taken enough risk. But when you look at a bunch of companies and you say, well, that one could be a total failure, but if it succeeds, it will be really big. That's the kind of investment you want in your portfolio.
Yeah, and to over answer the question, because I like to do that, that's also why you see a lot of corporate VCs. We've done some stuff with JetBlue. JetBlue just announced one, and when we were visiting them, they're like, we don't want to miss out on the next Uber or Lyft or anything. So if nothing else, you want to miss out because now you can scale faster than ever before. When Justin Bieber went on Instagram and they added 1 million people in like 24 hours, everyone went, why didn't Kodak do that? Because they can't think that way. So now if you have these venture arms, it's a way of future proofing, and probably the best category example I can give is probably actually the advertising agency business. If you look at WPP, they have people like Mark Reed and Sheila Spencer who are phenomenal. What you ever think about their creative agencies, whatever, WPP is a really smart investor in my opinion. I don't think Omnicom has done as well, but Omnicom has also been very focused on like smaller, not doing big deals until the Publicis, fun and games and that stuff. So the ad industry, it's like, for all we mock holding companies, all that, because it's the cool thing to do, they're no dummies. Martin Sorrell is beyond genius in many ways, and he took a shell company and created now the biggest advertising conglomerate. But the ad agencies, you still have Gary Vee out there who's got a 600-person like social media thing, which again didn't exist in 2010. So the ad industry does a better job of future proofing than we give ourselves credit for. It's kind of cool to like rag on advertising. I love advertising. And not just because the New York Times says we have like these gluten-free bars and all that stuff. That was ridiculous. If Facebook and Google and all these people are taking talent from our industry, we must be pretty good, right? So, but that's the agency business does a better job, and I think we give it credit for.
But will there be JetBlue planes on demand soon?
Someone's trying that. Private jets. I think they just went bust.
There's a ton of private jets raising money on a regional basis. There's a bunch actually.
Question over there. Right, yes.
Mine's a little bit more of a philosophical question. So you talked a lot about how more and more VC funds are popping up. But if you think about, I guess when tech first started, right, like way back when, there were a few different big players, right? And then all of a sudden, there's more and more players coming in, whether you talk about consumer-facing tech or you talk about ad tech. And then you kind of think about it again, where these big players kind of know where to play, and sometime at some point, some company, whether it started small or started big, kind of swallows up the entire category. So what's your viewpoint on the future of convergence? So basically, everything could be fragmented, which in many ways it is right now, but I feel like at some point things are going to start coming together. As you mentioned, it is about more of it feeling like a personal connection, right? Like the marketing thing you were just talking about. But at the same time, it's also about being able to be large scale all at once.
That's a very philosophical question. What I'm interested to know is your question more about, do you think VC firms will converge in the same way tech companies will?
Yeah.
I think it could go both ways. I was actually thinking more about the risk that a VC actually might be taking in the long run, later, like a couple years down the line, as things start to become, I guess, more funneled. Like, if that makes sense.
I'm not sure if this is going to answer the question in terms of the funneling. If you're talking about a 5 to 7 year timeline, I think what you're saying is if you invest in something now that seems innovative, could that in the next 4 years or 6 years be converged into something else? So could the return be lower? I think that risk is always there because convergence does happening, and I think you're going to start to see that in media. We've seen this transition from highly bespoke content to automated content, and now you'll see sort of human curation and personalization matched with automation. So I think there's definitely convergence all the time, but there's iterations of convergence. For VCs, I think the challenge is where you fall into the trap that I described, and I don't know if it answers your question, but if a VC plays in that point, they're definitely not taking the risk because they're investing in kind of me too companies or iterative companies. And that's the really hard thing. And that's especially the hard thing when there are more and more VCs in the market with money who are not that experienced. And by the way, I say that as someone who's been doing this for 20 months. So take what take what you will from it. We're all not that experienced, right?
I think we have time for one more question. Raymond, all over here to you.
Simple question. I just wanted to ask how you guys feel about the healthcare sector innovation in there, and do you guys have any big players in healthcare?
Us, no. We do not look at healthcare.
So we do if it's a consumer play. I don't know about you, but I'm personally obsessed with healthcare. But it's not, it doesn't play typically into our categories. I think what's fascinating about healthcare from a consumer perspective right now is that everything is about data. And so every app, at least from a consumer app perspective, I'm not going to speak to the other stuff because I know nothing about it, but from a consumer perspective, you see all these apps popping up that are tracking something, and particularly in relation to chronic disease. But we're at this moment in time where there's actually a gap in data and consumer behavior. So two things are happening. One is these consumer apps propose to provide a whole bunch of data that theoretically should help me improve if I've got multiple sclerosis or PCOS or endometriosis or whatever it is. The challenge with that is most of these consumer apps don't yet provide actionable insight to the consumer. They're just providing tracking data. And that's great if you're an Excel geek and a former management consultant, like totally obsessed with that. But for the majority of people, like they don't care, particularly when you consider the number of apps you open on your phone is like 5 to 7, and that takes up, 75 or 95% of your mind share on your phone. And then the second issue is related to that, which is consumer behavior is not there yet in terms of proactively taking care of your health. So people take care of their health when they're told they've got a very, very serious illness. And I think that that's still the gap that we're facing with, at least in the consumer healthcare space. Yeah, I think it's. I'm sure you've got a perspective on this, but I think it's a huge issue for every single health company out there. I mean, 23andMe went through a similar issue as well, and they've been able to bounce back. Actually, I think what's unfortunate for Theranos is that thing after thing is coming out, but it's what we're seeing is we definitely hear companies when they come in to pitch reframing kind of the regulations that they've passed and the way they're thinking about blood testing. I mean, some companies are avoiding it altogether. They're sort of saying we don't get in that space. I think it's challenging as well for female founders because Elizabeth is a great founder, but she was on the cover of Inc. magazine, being touted as will the next Steve Jobs be a female? Probably yes. And she was wearing a black turtleneck. And so I think it's challenging whether you're in healthcare or whether you're a female.
Great. Well, I want to thank our great panel here. This was appreciate everybody coming. Thank you.